Good evening and welcome to the October 9th work session of the Ann Arbor City Council to discuss emergency preparedness issues and considerations. Mr. Norman, I assume it's you.
Chief?
Or how about Mr. Lazarus, who will be the master of ceremonies?
Let him make some opening remarks.
Fair enough.
That's
Thank
always
you.
a smart thing to do.
Yeah, you should have realized. Thank you.
I'm going to be very brief because Chief and Mr. Norman have a lot of managing the clock to do to get us through everything on the agenda. I do want to thank members of council for agreeing to schedule this topic. National events recently focus our attention on things like violent weather emergencies and things of both natural and man-made origin. But a lot of times our attention is short-lived, as there's usually little or no local impact, and what impact there is fades in our memories. Nevertheless, it's always important for local government to plan for these events so we'll be ready if and when we are affected. Tonight's work session provides us with the opportunity to re-engage and educate, to blow the cobwebs out, and provide assurance to our residents and businesses that city staff and our elected officials are prepared to recognize and respond to emergencies, communicate effectively, and coordinate among the various local, state, federal, and nonprofit agencies that may be involved during a time of crisis. In addition to this scheduled meeting, staff has several practice and training events scheduled over the coming months to be further prepared, including a practice exercise later this month and future sessions provided by both the Naval Postgraduate School and the National Emergency Training Center. Mayor and council will most likely be asked to participate in one or more of these exercises. This evening, Chief Collins will lead the discussion, which really consists of three parts. First, Chief will provide an overview of the emergency management structure. Mr. Norman, our emergency manager, will provide a briefing on direction and control of emergency operations. Mary Fells, Assistant City Attorney, will review the changes and the rationale for those modifications to City Code Chapter 15 that will be presented to Council at its next meeting. Lisa Wandrash, our Communications Manager, will present guidance on communications and media relations during and after emergencies. In Part 2, our Service Area Administrators, Chiefs, and Directors will present their roles and responsibilities during emergencies. And then finally, in Part 3, Chief Collins will facilitate a practice exercise as time permits. It's essential that the council members actively participate, ask questions, and engage throughout the evening. As I said before, Chief Collins is our official manager of the clock to see how much we can get through on this ambitious agenda. And with that, the floor is yours.
Well, I'd like to echo Mr. Lazarus and thank you all for coming this evening. Events have drawn this to everyone's attention. It is important that you understand and we understand collaboratively what our roles are when something like this transpires. Fortunately, we're fortunate it has not happened. We hope it doesn't happen, but you never know. And it's not necessarily the stuff that we're seeing on TV. Now, you're seeing the hurricanes and those kind of things, tornadoes. Tonight's event will be a tornado, which is a realistic hazard that we have in this part of the country. So we're trying to make it as real as we can. We're going to walk you through that. As Mr. Lazarus said, we're going to cover this exercise has three parts to it. We're going to talk about roles and responsibilities. Gotta be careful, apparently I walk in front of the camera here. Incident management structure, which is the structure that we utilize to manage in some orderly fashion disasters when they do occur. That starts at the federal level and it trickles down to us. Thank you. I suspect you all can hear me well. I guess the TV audience probably cannot. And then finally, we're going to do a little tabletop training exercise or mock scenario so that we can actually apply some of the things that we've done. Actually, I think what you will see us do is give a host of situations and let you see how it is that we would respond to those and take some feedback from you. If you have comments or questions, we'd certainly welcome those, and we would like you to engage in this as much as possible if it facilitates learning for you. All right? So let me move on here. Time is short. Here we go. Our program outcomes. We want to do three things today. We want to familiarize you with our disaster response and control activities. We want you to understand the major components, you being the council and mayor, of your responsibilities. We all have responsibilities during a situation like this, we want to make sure everybody's clear on what those responsibilities and rules are. We want to familiarize you with the major function or functions of city staff. Again, sharing with you some of our major responsibilities that we have to execute were a situation like this to occur. So part one, rules and responsibilities. There's actually a disaster management or a disaster preparedness cycle. Disasters are managed in this fashion. There's 4 elements to it. There are mitigation activities. Those transpire before the emergency ever transpires. They're the things that we do to prevent and or mitigate the impact of a large-scale emergency or disaster occurring. We want to get ahead of the curve. We can anticipate some of the risks and find ways to try to lessen or stop those risks ahead of time. The preparation is what we're doing here. We're preparing to deal with one. If mitigation procedures fail, then what we'll utilize are the plans that we put together to deal with the situation. Obviously, there's the event, and then there's the response. And that's all of our resources coming together to deal with the situation, whatever it is. At times, that will extend beyond our abilities and require state and federal assistance. And we'll get into that tonight, because it gets a little bit complex as to how that happens and who does what and those kind of things. And then the recovery. That's the aftermath of the whole thing, how we pull it together, how we bring ourselves back to normal or better than normal. I just told you that in 30 seconds. Next, what I'd like to do is bring Rick Norman up for a minute here. Rick's going to talk. There's a hierarchy for this stuff, starting at the federal, state, and working down to the lower level. I would like him to explain to you a little bit how that's structured, how it works, and how responsibilities fit together there. Rick?
Okay, thank you. So we're going to start talking about the federal level for emergency management. I'll be brief with that part of it. But I'd like to start with something called the Robert T. Stafford Act, which is the main emergency management act for the country. That act constitutes the statutory authority for FEMA and how they operate. It also provides for a system of disaster assistance and the declaration process to get to that point. Later on tonight, we're going to actually talk about the declaration process on a local level and on a request for a governor's declaration. So in this scenario, we'll stop and talk about how that actually works. Other things that the Stafford Act covers are things like pre-disaster mitigation. And you may know that we're currently updating the city's hazard mitigation plan. That plan is funded by a FEMA pre-disaster mitigation grant, which has the authority under the Stafford Act that we're speaking about. So that is the pre-disaster mitigation. And then the Stafford Act also talks about local preparedness. So they supply funding and authority for what we do at both the state and the local level in terms of preparedness. So I'd just like to mention the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA. All of our training, all of our guidance, all of our structure for how we operate comes through FEMA, which is sitting underneath the Department of Homeland Security. So FEMA presents online courses. They have a couple facilities in the country, the Center for Domestic Preparedness in Anniston, Alabama, the Emergency Management Institute in Emmitsburg, Maryland, that provide on-site training. The training that's coming here that Mr. Lazarus mentioned in June is from the Emergency Management Institute in Emmitsburg, Maryland. That's the group that's coming into Ann Arbor for a substantial training in emergency management. In Michigan, it's the Michigan State Police Emergency Management Homeland Security Division that manages the FEMA training and everything else emergency management-wise down to the local level where we sit. So that's filtered through the state through that division. So I just want you to look at, by the way, you do have a handout on the Stafford Act in your package, and that does describe the process for declarations, and also it describes the assistance that they provide after a declaration. So you have another handout that looks like this, called the National Preparedness Goal. And if I were to pull out every fact sheet on everything FEMA has, we'd be here for 3 days. But this is one that's kind of very useful for guidance. If you look at that, looks like this. If you look at the second page, there's a chart. And on that chart, across the top line, is something called mission areas. Underneath that are things that are called core capabilities. So if you look at it a little while, it will start to make sense, but under a certain mission, as you go down that column, you'll see the different core capabilities that are required to uphold that mission. We can use those core capabilities for our planning. We also use those for our design and evaluation of exercises. Our exercises are designed to pick up on core capabilities that's required by the federal government so that we're hitting the marks that we should be hitting in terms of our exercising and planning. In the exercise that we're having in October, that Mr. Lazarus also mentioned, will be compliant to that kind of federal program. Okay, is that the right button? So let's get a little bit more down to the local level here in terms of authority. First of all, there's Michigan Public Act 390. Michigan Public Act 390 is the Emergency Management Act at the state level. That defines local emergency management programs in the state of Michigan and also defines disaster relief at the state level, sort of mimicking what you get from the Stafford Act. When we say that Ann Arbor is a Michigan Public Act 390 program, that means that we meet the criteria for a municipal program as a city and that we interact directly with the state on anything emergency management-wise. So we're not subsequent to county or anything else. We go direct, and we are fortunate to have that designation through the state of Michigan. So it's a direct line of communication. City Code Chapter 15 is mimicking Public Act 390. I'm not going to get into that anymore because Mary Fields is going to explain that in more detail, but that's the next level down locally that we use for emergency management. The resolution to adopt the National Incident Management System, that is a mandate from the federal government that we must all, post 9/11, the whole country must operate under an identical management structure for disasters and emergencies. That structure under the National Incident Management System is called ICS, or the Incident Command System. You are going to see a diagram later that shows you what that structure looks like. But we are required to operate under that system, and we all train underneath that system. Everything I need to mention is the community partners that we work with in the city. There are other emergency management programs adjacent to us and within the city. The University of Michigan is one example. Michigan Medical has a emergency management program, as does the VA hospital. We also collaborate with St. Joe Mercy Hospital System. We meet quarterly together as emergency managers from all those other things I mentioned to keep each other up to date, to get to know what we're working on, and do a lot of collaboration. So that's an ongoing process. I want to take a break here. We don't have a slide for this section, but I want to talk a little bit about internal and external communications that we do. If we need to activate the emergency management group and we're having something going on in the city, we actually use our Code Red system. You might recognize the Code Red system as something that our citizens can sign up for emergency notifications, but it has another side, and that side is internal communications for specialty teams. So we have personnel in there, different local teams, PD is in there, SWAT, dive team, those kind of teams are in there for the internal notification. So Code Red kind of has a dual function in that respect. If you will look, you have another handout on EOC activation levels. I think it's about a 3-pager. There we go.
Starts there.
It's a chart.
Oh, it's right behind it. Right behind it. That's the instruction to it, and then the diagram should be right back there. There you go.
Okay, looks like that. Probably self-explanatory, but 3 levels. If something's going on and we need to watch it, maybe severe weather is coming, maybe the National Weather Service is predicting a high probability of severe weather, we will get together in the administration meeting room and just monitor the situation. We're looking at it. We've got connectivity. We're listening to what the state's doing. We're listening to what's happening on the other side of the state. And we're just getting a handle on this and trying to get some determination of what we might do, and we start planning for the next move. That would be a monitoring level. The next one would be a partial activation. And level 1 is a full activation. So as we monitor a situation and ramp up, we will move to different levels, and as you see, different personnel from the city will be involved as we get more ramped up. And some of that stuff is very incident specific. If it involves other agencies in the city, then we'll have them at the table during this pre-phase of activation. The administration meeting room, as we go through the remodeling process on that, we're going to kind of upgrade our connectivity in there, so we'll make that a more workable room in terms of how we connect with different entities from that room and be able to monitor additional stuff. So you might call it a mini EOC kind of setup, but that'll be the next move. I need to mention, I mentioned our external partners. When something is going on in the city here, we get on the phone with each other. What are you doing? What are you thinking about? And we exchange what's going on. So we're in contact with the university, the hospitals, the VA, St. Joe Hospital, emergency management programs, just to know that we're on the same page and what everybody else is doing. And the county, by the way, county emergency management program. A little interesting thing on a regional basis, we are connected to the Michigan State Police Emergency Management Homeland Security Division through a district coordinator. The state's split up into regions, emergency management regions. We sit in what's called Region 2 South. The state police put a lieutenant in that position in this region that is our connection and our point person for communicating with the state. And that person is, we had a little exercise last week up at the treatment plant, and he was there to see that. So he appears at every exercise. He'll be at the other exercises that we're doing also. So that's our state connection. Just so you know, there's a way that we communicate with the State Emergency Operations Center and the State Emergency Management Division, and that is through a secure platform, which is a website that we get on, and we can do all of our reporting and communicating through that website. That is called MySIMS, Michigan Critical Incident Management System. It also has a nickname of Web EOC. So it can actually act as a virtual EOC if we need it to. So on that particular system, we can post our situation, our situation updates. We can post our damage assessments. We can post all of our activity logs. And through that system, well, by the way, you can use that to post our declaration documents also directly to the State Emergency Operations Center. So through that system, we keep in total contact with the state EOC. They're knowing what we're doing, and we're knowing what everybody else is doing in that respect. It's a scrolling activity log that we put up on the screen, and we can keep in touch with everything that we're doing. And a little bit about direction and control. You may know that we have just completed a complete rewrite and update of the city emergency response plan, particularly the emergency action guidelines. Those guidelines are called functional annexes, and one of those annexes is called direction and control. And that annex delineates the responsibilities and actions of the mayor, the administrator, and myself. It's a checklist format, and it tells everything that every individual should be doing or should be thinking about as their role within this emergency management plan. So we're not going to talk about Chapter 15 again because Mary Fales is going to do that, and then right after that, Lisa Wondrash is going to talk about media relations and public information. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Rick. Mary?
So it's free?
You don't need that? Okay. You want the clicker? Do it at your pace.
So So as Rick indicated, the federal program that he describes provide an incident management framework. So if we're having a national or regional event, everyone's using the same approach to the issue. They're using common terminology. The State Emergency Management Act that he mentioned, Public Act 390, provides both statutory indemnifications for the actions that we take during a disaster, and delegates from the state down to the local entity certain authority. Specifically, as a Public 390 entity, it delegates to the chief elected official, that being the mayor, defined by statute, certain responsibilities. To articulate those responsibilities, council has adopted Chapter 15 of the City Code. Chapter 15 provides both a policy and an organizational framework on a local level for utilization of resources and personnel in following the mitigation, preparation, response, and recovery activities that the chief outlined in the slide he showed you earlier. Let's see if this works. Oh, wrong way. Ah, thank you. So I already did that. Okay, so council has tasked the city administration and the city attorney with reviewing all ordinances for current application as well as consistency with the organizational structure of the city as it now exists. So a complete review of Chapter 15 was done in connection with the updates that we are doing on our hazard mitigation plan and in our emergency response plan. And what your council is going to be presented on October 16th defines a clear delineation between the responsibilities that the mayor is responsible for both statutorily under Public Act 390 as well as the city charter. It outlines the responsibilities that the city administrator has. Under the charter, the administrator is council's administrative agent. He has direction and control responsibility for the personnel and the resources of the city. And the reorganization makes clear what those responsibilities are for the city administrator. It also identifies clearly the responsibilities of the emergency management coordinator for planning and exercise and coordination of those resources on a day-to-day basis to make those resources available when the administrator needs them to prepare for a disaster. The other thing that it does is better encapsulate, by bringing previous sections together, what the emergency management program is, so that the public has an easy way to identify what our program is, even if the specifics of it are protected under federal or state law. They'll have an idea of what the program is designed to do to protect them. Finally, the reorganization makes sure that we use common terminology under state and federal programs, and it also reaffirms the responsibilities not only of the mayor and the city administrator and the emergency management coordinator, but those responsibilities that transfer to council after a certain time if we have an emergency that lasts longer than 7 days. So that's the structure of the reorganization. In relationship to the mayor, as I said, Public Act 390 specifically designates the mayor as the chief executive officer of the city. And under that statute, he has specific responsibilities to appoint an emergency management coordinator, to declare a local state of emergency if warranted, based on the recommendation of the city administrator, and the information provided by to the administrator by the emergency management coordinator, and to authorize travel restrictions during a local state of emergency. Finally, he has the responsibility to request if that emergency exceeds both our own resources and the resources that we have a right to draw on under our mutual aid compacts, a request to the governor to declare a state of emergency. You may remember the tornadoes that went through a few years ago. Didn't hit Ann Arbor, but they hit our neighboring areas, and an actual state of emergency was requested because of the extent of those tornadoes. This statutory authority is reinforced by the city charter itself, which provides, under the responsibilities of the mayor, the powers to stand in the same place that the sheriff would in relationship to provide public safety. At that point, the sheriff would have had control of the county for public safety when our charter was adopted. These responsibilities that are listed for the mayor would be equally applicable in the absence of the mayor to the line of succession that council establishes for mayor pro tem or acting mayor. So it's one of the reasons we're going through this tonight is because you might think, oh, those aren't my initial responsibilities, but if you are in the line of succession for the mayor, you need to be as familiar with these as he is. As I said, the city administrator has direction, supervision, and coordination responsibility for all administrative departments under the city charter. Council had, within the last couple of years, approved a specific reorganization for those administrative areas, and reaffirmed the city administrator's responsibilities for that. In a disaster or the coordination of those resources, both personnel and equipment, by through the administrative departments or through any disaster relief forces that we have a right to draw on based on mutual aid, would be under the immediate direction and control of the city administrator. So one of the things that the new chapter does specifically is delineate that, that division. The emergency management coordinator has responsibility for day-to-day planning, coordination, and operation of emergency management activities in the city. Rick mentioned a couple of the things that he is coordinating on behalf of the city. The hazard mitigation plan update, the review of the emergency response plan, not only by city departments, but by our partners who participate in the annexes. He has responsibility specifically for conducting emergency training and exercising within the city. And most importantly, and he did describe part of this in his presentation, he acts as a liaison with the municipal, county, state, and federal authorities that also have emergency plans. So he talked about his quarterly meeting. He participates in game day activities in the emergency action site for U of M, for example. Finally, city council. As I indicated, first, any member of city council that's in the line of succession needs to be familiar with the mayor's responsibilities, but council itself, both by ordinance and by state law, has some specific responsibilities. If a local state of emergency extends past the first 7 days, council has the authority to authorize continuation or renewal of travel restrictions. Or if, after the first 7 days, it's felt that the local state of emergency is not necessary any longer, council can terminate that local state of emergency. They can, on the recommendation of the city administrator and the mayor, recommend procedures for succession of government. Let's say we didn't have everyone available that's in the line of succession. Again, they could also alter the, on recommendation of the mayor, the order of succession for the emergency management coordinator, if not all of those individuals were available. They can call emergency sessions of council. They could suspend the normal rules for adoption of ordinances if an emergency was necessary, move everything to a first reading, or sole reading adoption, establish budgetary funds and expenditures that we would normally have a longer process for. Council has the authority to basically shortcut that process in an emergency, and that's council's responsibility, not the mayor after 7 days. So the only other thing I want to point out is nothing in these responsibilities abridges or curtails the normal powers of council, unless it's specifically granted to the mayor under Public Act 390 or delegated to the mayor as a power under this ordinance. So it's a tool for council if we have a long-standing emergency, but it's council could certainly go the long route if they felt it was appropriate. As we said, on the 16th, we'll be presenting the ordinance for council, and any additional documentation that's necessary to implement the ordinance will be presented to council with second reading.
Thanks, Mary. You flip it over. There you go. You got it? Okay. Want it?
Yeah, no, so you'll know when I'm done. So the purpose of the information here really is very, very high level. There's obviously a ton of information on this slide that doesn't really address the tactics and the dozens and dozens of ways we'd be communicating during an emergency or staff's responsibilities. I have one right here. During emergency. It's simply to better inform you of what council's role would be during an emergency and give guidance on that. So during EOC activation, the specific title for my role is Public Information Officer, so you'll see that throughout this presentation. So I would be the Public Information Officer, and my role would be primarily to be coordinating, verifying information before, during, and after an emergency event. The establishment of a single point of contact during an emergency obviously is crucial to controlling the flow of information. And like I said, when I say controlling the flow of information, that's really specific to the point of ensuring that information has been verified and that the information that the city is distributing to residents has been verified and is factual information. Sometimes that's not going to be as quick as we would like it. Boots need to be on the ground to verify information when a catastrophe has occurred, and sometimes that could take 1, 2, 3, many hours before we actually know what has happened and what needs to be done. So council plays a crucial role in helping the city to disseminate the information from the city and the information that's already been verified and factual to your constituents. So during a crisis then, and although this is speaking to council in this slide, it's for all of us to take heart that all of us should be working as a team versus as individuals. and coming together as a team then to help distribute that information and ensure that residents have the most up-to-date information and information that is accurate. So once the Joint Information Center has been established, which is one of the roles that I play in the EOC, the mayor serves as a spokesperson within the EOC and for council as a whole. That's not to mean that he's the only spokesperson though. Obviously, the police chief, the fire chief, there's others who play that spokesperson role during a crisis, depending on what the nature of the emergency is. But for the purposes of today, it's the mayor serves in that singular role as the spokesperson. Another really important thing to keep in mind in a crisis, and we've seen many, many examples of late, is social media usage during a crisis, trying our very best not to reshare information that hasn't been validated or has not been distributed by the city itself. This really can play a hurtful role in diverting emergency services away from the crucial role that they're playing at that time in life safety. I'll just give a few examples of late to kind of demonstrate how important it is for us, not any of us, not to be doing that with social media. In Mexico recently with one of the earthquakes, I think many of us had heard about a girl who was trapped in a school, and many resources were diverted to try to save her, and that actually was not factual. There was no girl trapped. In Puerto Rico, they had many examples being shared on social media of a dam breach that in fact was not a threat. They did not need to be diverting resources. And even unfortunately in Las Vegas last Sunday, there was examples of people sharing links for their loved ones that were lost. And the links were not actually links of their loved ones. They were for-profit and inappropriate links that they were trying to profit from. So it's just unfortunate examples, though, of why social media can play an inappropriate role during an emergency. But that's not to mean that the city itself wouldn't be utilizing our social media means to reach out to residents and communicate with them directly. And finally, I will just leave everyone with the thoughts that during a crisis, all of us have an important role in displaying patient support and confidence in all of our emergency responders, confidence in the training that they've had, confidence in the fact that they are putting their heart and soul into reaching people and giving them the help that they need during the time of a crisis, and that that is what all of us can help in sharing that with residents and letting them know that we're working just as fast and hard as we can to get them the information they need and the resources where they need to be.
Is that it, Lisa?
Yes,
Great,
I think
thank
that
you.
covers it.
Just a couple of comments from an emergency responder. I couldn't echo more what Lisa said about verified and centralized information flow. What happens to myself and the police chief and others that provide resources is that critical resources, we have to decide where they go. And if there's misinformation like that, we end up digging in a school where there's nobody there, where I need those resources elsewhere. Or it takes me a long time to get additional resources to those points. So it's critical that all of us make sure that that information is verified, that we share the same information as much as possible across the board. As for you folks, you'll probably be getting texts, and let me just say this. You'll be lucky if your cell phone and your phones work. I didn't put that in the exercise tonight. I thought about it, but it puts a real wrinkle in the way that we do business. And I'll bet you $1 to a donut. No offense, Jim. But that if we have a major emergency like that, we will lose cell towers and those kind of things. In fact, I talked with Tom and IT about getting towers, portable towers and things like that out there. It really complicates things. It makes it more difficult because people are trying to get hold of their loved ones. You don't know the extent of the damage and those kind of things. So it's all the more critical that that information flow be centralized and be uniform across the board. And those. Okay, we're going to move on to the incident management system. I'm in everybody's way. Let me move it here. I'm sorry. Take the clicker over there. I'm trying to get the best advantage here that I can for this. When we talked about, they talked to you about Public Act 390. It says you have to have this particular ICS system and structure for managing. That's what we're going to talk about now. There's a very defined structure that we utilize when we manage large-scale emergencies. We use it when we manage a fire day-to-day. The police use it for different aspects of what they do. It's that common across the country and unified across the country when we utilize this system. So this is the system that they used in Las Vegas, no doubt. They used for wildland fires, the hurricanes. This is the system. An important aspect about the declaration that you need to understand is typically federal aid is tied to that declaration of a state of emergency, both locally and at the state level. So it's not something that we take lightly. When we have extensive damage, when we have tapped our resources for everything that we have and we know that we cannot continue to manage it, that's when we say, I think we need to declare. And you do it early if the damage looks sufficient enough. They can always deny, but you got to put yourself in the pipeline and start funneling data and that kind of stuff early. This is part of that system that helps that happen. And we'll talk more about that in terms of documenting costs as we go on. So the incident management system is also known as the incident command system or incident command structure. You see the mayor at the top is the CEO. You see council there at the side. All right. As you drop down, you see the city administrator, who is really the operational guru that we just talked about there. The administrative forces report to him. So administratively, he is the orchestrator, if you will. He has a staff with him in the EOC, in the Emergency Operations Center, and we'll talk about the EOC again in a little bit. But he has a staff there to help him. When they talked about the different levels of activation for the EOC, in many instances we'll go to a level 3, which is just the basic level. It's essentially the war room next door to his office. It's the conference room there. And certain people immediately go there. And whatever department's having the issue or is primarily in charge of that issue, for example. They go there early, they begin to monitor the situation, they begin to decide how to scale this up. The beauty of this is you only use the parts that you need. It's scalable. And as the situation expands, you continue to expand with it. As it contracts, you bring it back down. Okay? It integrates well with both state and federal assets as they come into play. They will plug right into this system with us. So starting out with the city administrator and his staff, this is known as the command staff. You've got the PIO. I won't repeat what Lisa just talked about in terms of her responsibilities. But that's her job right there with the city administrator. You've got the safety officer, and there will be OSHA, OSHA, all kinds of regulatory agencies needing to be involved and wanting information and reports. Steve will know, he and his staff will know who those people are, who those agencies are, what we have to report. We operating people will have our own safety sectors at the emergency scene monitoring our folks. That will all be coordinated together in a unified manner, and it's run out of here, right here. We have a liaison position, a very critical position. Right now you see that's the new deputy city administrator. This is the gatekeeper. Again, when you have a major emergency like that, you're going to get federal organizations, you're going to get state organizations, and you're going to get a whole lot of folks locally that have a good intent and want to help that will just self-deploy. The liaison officer manages that. For example, the governor's office calls, they want to talk to the mayor. The liaison officer coordinates that with the city administrator and with the mayor. When they show up on scene, they do not walk into the emergency operations center. The liaison officer puts them in a working area away from where all that activity transpires. If the incident commander, in this case the city administrator, needs a particular resource, the liaison officer will get that individual, bring him into the EOC. That way we have some control over the environment during those very stressful times. And everybody's not just making their way in there demanding information. That's a critical position. Right now, Derek and I are working on either he or I taking that position right there, more than likely Derek, until this position is filled right there. Perhaps even Sarah if she's available. If we, for example, need to notify an agency, the liaison would establish that. We have those numbers in the emergency operations plan, those contact numbers, and all those kind of things if we need to make that. All right? You also have the Office of the Emergency Manager, who has the operational emergency plan, who has the resource manual, who is right there, who sets up the EOC and helps manage that, make sure that the state is informed of all the information that they need to have, that he talked to you a bit about. It almost put me to sleep, but that's the way the state is. There's bureaucracy everywhere, and even in a disaster, you got to deal with it. And Rick is really good at dealing with that bureaucracy. That's the world he lives in. We trust him to get that information up there and get those resources back to us, and then have those plans and annexes, or EAGs that he talked about, in place, and that we do what we're doing tonight. I know everybody would much rather be watching football and all that. That's why I thank you a lot for coming out here, so that we're better prepared to deal with this if and when it ever happens. Hopefully it does not. Next, by the way, I have the city attorney's office. Obviously, the city attorney would be up here, down to here, but there are going to be a lot of legal issues that come up. That's why all those ships at sea have an attorney on them. Things come up, and you need legal advice. Some of the decisions will be very difficult. We need to understand the liabilities, if any, even though we have some immunities, to some of those decisions. And that's why that individual is there with us as part of that staff out of the city administrator's office, or city attorney's office. The general staff down here, there are 4 key positions in almost every emergency under this structure right here. Right? Operationally, you start right here. Typically, that is the police chief or the fire chief. Some major emergency has transpired where we're on the scene trying to control that emergency and doing what it is we do, and we'll talk about what our responsibilities are in a minute. It can also work for any SAA or any major department in the city. Let's say we have a water issue. Let's say we have a dam issue. I'm not the expert. I can put the boats in, I can go get the people, but I don't know how to close those dams and do that kind of stuff. Mr. Yuppie, for example, would be the person that would be the lead in that operations, and the rest of us would support that. It could happen with IT, it could happen with public services, a lot of different scenarios you can imagine where that operations person would not necessarily be police or fire. But you understand the role. These are operational roles. These are tactical roles here. When the direction comes from up here about what it is we're going to try to do, we put it into play. We make the thing happen, the strategy transpire. And of course, we also provide information to help the city administrator make decisions, make the right decision as best we can with what we have. You notice down here is the finance and administration section. I'll let them talk again in a minute. When you start tapping federal resources, regional resources, bringing your own people back, when we bring state resources in, if we ask for those resources, we have to put them up someplace. We have to feed them. We've got to do all those things that you kind of forget about. What if we need bulldozers? What if we need cranes and dump trucks? You know, that's what that, somebody's got to pay for that. Now, we put into place here recently a document that lets us track that, and it allows finance to approve that. Might be on an emergency basis, but we've got to keep track of every penny we spend if we hope to be reimbursed. You'll notice on each of these slides that come up when folks talk about their responsibilities, it says monitor costs, document, do all that, and turn it in. If it's not there, if you don't do it, you don't get reimbursed. So it's important that we manage that aspect of our responsibilities as well, so that we're made whole when we're done with that. Next, you've got logistics. That starts out with public service there, because a lot of the logistics are things that we already possess that we'll need right away. For example, we may need barriers to shut off streets. We'll set up a perimeter around any incident that transpires. There's where we go. They've got it there. We need dump trucks. They got it. The other thing that we do is we've gotten with community services, well, they're not here, they'll be down here because they have a lot of those same resources available in their shop. In addition, for example, they control the rec centers, which make great places to house people during evacuation. So they'll come together, they'll strategize, they have the plans, they'll be able to lay that out. Oh, we've got this block over here, we've got to get these people somewhere. What's the closest rec center? All right, now how do we get them there? Who's going to get hold of the ride and get those buses and get everybody there? That's a logistics function, and that's what they do and do well. There's no way one person can do all that. That's why we take an emergency, we break it down into manageable chunks, and we put the resources there to get the job done. I don't care how big the disaster is or how big the emergency is. It's a matter of bringing it down to a scope that we can deal with in little segments and building on that. And that's what this whole thing is about right here. You get into the planning function over here, right over here. Now, that is incident specific, because you have to have the technical knowledge regarding the situation to be able to plan. What you're doing there is you're monitoring the situation. You're looking at the resource commitments now, the resource commitments necessary 8 hours from now that it'll take to wrestle this bear and get things in place. And so to understand what those capabilities may be or needs may be, you have to have some indication of what's really going on the street in your mind as you begin to plan. This section will also, at times, develop strategies and tactics that can be brought up to the incident commander for consideration. We anticipate this is going to happen in this period of time. These are the resources. Our recommendation is this tactic along with this strategy or this one. And so command now is getting informed information to be able to make decisions on how to deal with the situation. Very simplistic, but very effective. And again, you use what you need here. We may not use sometimes finance. We may not use planning, but the other two will come into play depending upon what the situation is. That's all you need, and it'll work. If it gets away from us, it continues to escalate, then we plug in the other pieces, and we staff those pieces. Any questions? Yes, sir.
So, I see several key parts in this command structure, and for some, your department, police department, I understand that there's clear lines of succession. For some of the others, the city administrator, chief information officer, the PIO, what is the redundancy? What is in place to make sure that this is robust,
right,
even if somebody is personally affected by a disaster?
Our second and third commands are also part of this. We had an exercise the other day, and we asked them to bring the second command so that they. Go ahead, Mr. Lazarus.
Yeah, Councilmember, it's also important to realize that emergencies go on for a period of time, and you have to be able to sustain the operation. No one can function effectively after a certain period of high stress and no sleep. So our responsibility also is to have people who can staff the EOC on a 24/7 basis. To share a story with you, we had, my previous life, we had a major flood event, and while that was right before a major sporting event that occurred in town. So staff went from responding to recovery, and then as soon as that major sporting event was over, we had another major storm event. So they went about 6 weeks, and we found out that we were not very deep in certain positions and needed to do a better job of having that kind of 24-hour staffing with redundancy. So as you point out, there are a lot of positions on there. Our job is to make sure that we can staff on a continual basis for an extended period of time.
Derek, do you have a question?
No.
Comment?
About
So, any other? Good question. Really good question. Because I can tell you when I've dealt with these things in the past, at about 16 hours, 18 hours, my head starts to hurt, and I'm not kidding, it really does. You start to become drained. You really have to plan for relief. I mean, we've sat with our own staff, decided how we're going to do that. Last Monday, as a group, when we were going through a dry exercise, we talked about that redundancy, that need to support up, and folks realize they've got to have that depth because after a while, you're just exhausted. You'll live off the adrenaline at first for the first 12 or so hours, and then after that, it'll catch up to you. Particularly if you've been busy the day before or the night before on fires and those kind of things. They will flat wear you out. So that is important. You must maintain that cycle and that rotation.
Excuse me. When you mentioned parks facilities being great spots for bringing people to or staging or whatever, have you talked to the public schools about similar, or
Yes,
how are
yes.
they involved?
Yes. The auditoriums are great too. Those guys. A lot just depends. What may happen initially that I've been involved in is you move people to a location to start with, just to get them out of harm's way. And then you set up something a little more permanent.
Could I answer that? Could I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
We do have designated shelters already, location. The majority of them are schools, but there are 22 locations in the city that are shelters that are, have an agreement with the American Red Cross and MOU that they will activate when needed. And of course, those locations will also be event specific, but those are pre-established.
Yes.
Just wondering, what type of training have we done internally with these partners, the schools, the U of M, Red Cross?
Well, I can
On
tell you
these
U of M
various
has a very
scenarios.
elaborate emergency management system and training process. Without getting too much into it, each of those ball games goes through an exercise like that. Plus, they have some other issues there that we practice for and those kind of things that might be unique to a college campus. But they have a very robust emergency management program. They practice it, they have good plans, I can tell you that. Rick, is there some others that you want to add?
Yeah, we do participate in their exercises, and they participate in ours. So we've got that.
The county also has an emergency management establishment for the entire county as well. We work very well with them. Theirs is pretty significant as well. Yes, ma'am.
This might be sort of an obvious question, but as a council member, where's the best place that we can be so we're not in the way but available?
On the end of your phone. Honestly, what will likely, I'll be real honest with you, what is more than likely to happen, we're gonna play it out a little bit tonight, you are gonna get hammered. If they can get hold of you, you are going to get hammered. That's really up to the mayor. You'll see that in a scenario, at some point, the manager goes to the mayor and says, let's call an executive session here. Because you're gonna need to be updated. Lisa, by that time, will have packets of information that she can share with you. And I know that you're getting hammered. That's one of those points where we're gonna wanna try to get hold of you and give you good information. If need be, we'll send folks to get you. If there is a need, the mayor says, I need the council together in session, and you can't get there, if need be, we'll send a car out to check at your residence. More often than not, we'll be able to get hold of you. But expect if something happens, that you will hear from us as soon as we get an opportunity. You'll see in the scenario where, again, the city administrator will tell you, I need to get hold of the mayor and council and get them together. We've got to brief him. He knows that's a responsibility. What we would ask, though, is give us a little breathing room until we have enough information that it's helpful for you. You know, the other issue is, if it happens in your district, you're gonna wanna know right now as much as possible. We will be at the EOC, or the city administrator will be, that liaison officer or the direct line to him will be the people. But we will not leave you hanging. We'll get you the information as soon as we can. But expect us to be looking to touch base with you, okay? And the mayor pretty much will head that up because he is the head of the elected body for this purpose. Yes, ma'am?
And it's just in the emergency action guidelines that were recently updated, that will delineate all of our responsibilities.
No, actually, let me explain to you. This packet that we put together here
It's excellent.
is for you to keep in a binder to help you remember what it is. Now, the emergency action guides are for our operations, all right? That will tell the fire department you do this, and that will, you know, it'll have some of that stuff in there. But we wanted you to have some of this information here. Have a takeaway when you left, and we're always available to answer questions and those kind of things anytime you have a question. Mr. Manager or Mr. Administrator, do you want to say something?
No, I'm good for now.
Okay. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned earlier that it's highly unlikely that our phones will work, and you mentioned that there'll come a point where you need to reach us. What are the processes for how do we make that sure that that works and we're available?
Yeah, stay where you're at, if you can.
Okay.
If you can't, then we'll talk about that later.
Okay, physically. Okay.
Yeah, there's certain aspects of this stuff that don't go public, okay? And so certain parts of that, we're just not gonna sit here and talk about tonight. We can talk about offline, in the emergency plan and those kind of things. Those are security issues that we'll talk with you one-on-one about.
If I could add just a
Go
little
ahead.
bit to that as well. To answer the question about availability, your physical location isn't necessarily as crucial at that time. Where you are isn't necessarily as important as what you're doing and maybe even what you're not doing. You'll notice we have general guidelines for the way that the elected officials in the city of Ann Arbor communicate with staff, and those are under normal circumstances. But under these extraordinary circumstances, it's necessary for a change, and just in order for our shops to all still be able to do their function and still be efficient as we're able to be with everything that's going on. This template that we have here is a basic It's very basic. We modify it according to the situation. But one of the things that I think is important to point out is that that direct line that council members have to the people on the bottom there, that goes away in an event like this. And it's important that all the elected officials' communications goes directly to the mayor. That really will help us to be more efficient and make sure that we can get our jobs done better.
Thanks, Jim. Anything else before we move on? Good dialogue. Okay, now, you see this right here? I said all that, so let's move on. All right, what we'd like to do now is just give you a quick summary of what each of our responsibilities is in a situation like this. I know the administrator's slides up here, but let me go ahead and start and tell you, as the fire department, clearly our issue would be under the direction of the city administrator to deal with fire emergencies, mass casualty EMS, all right? Technical rescue, like the boats and the dams and those kind of things, getting people out of swift water. The technical rescue would be the collapse, where we would have to go in and bring people out. Hazardous materials emergencies, it would be our responsibility to manage the resources and manage the incident on scene to bring those to a successful resolution. And of course, we have to make sure that we get the costs and the resources and all that documented appropriately. Because what we will be doing, quite honestly, is bringing in all of our forces coming back. We'll have to set up a rotation and do those kind of things. So I think others here are going to go around, Mr. Manager or Mr. Administrator, if you'd like to start. And
Sure. As you read through the bullets on this slide, I'd like to share some thoughts and experiences from the unfortunate nature of having to respond to several emergencies. The first and most immediate problem is to recognize that we have an emergency condition and understand what the appropriate response is. Under-responding puts life and property at risk. Over-responding creates an environment where people don't trust us and they don't really pay attention because they feel like we're being overly protective. Escalating the responses necessary is also a challenge. That's why communications are important. Then after, as you back away from it, controlling the reentry and recovery operations are also very difficult. Everyone wants to get back to their home. They want to see what happened, if anything. You as elected officials want to make sure the people in your wards are taken care of and things are going smoothly. But I can tell you, as working on recovery operations, things can be kind of nasty when you go back into an area. It could be anything from snakes to the residue of systems failing. So those are the challenges, I think, from an operational standpoint. Chief Collins mentioned we need to provide and document our resource use. FEMA can be very persnickety about what they'll pay for after the fact. So while certainly responding and protecting loss of life and major property damage is foremost in our minds, Tom's concern is going to be making sure that we capture the costs so that we can be reimbursed later. Not that Tom is cold and heartless, but that someone has to have the level head when everyone else is losing theirs. We need to ensure accurate and appropriate communications, as Lisa talked about. There are many cases where resources have been diverted because of bad information, and what we tell the public has to be accurate also to build credibility. One of the biggest problems we can run into is coordinating, controlling outside resources, particularly volunteers who want to come and help. And you can get overrun by volunteers where part of your resource effort is diverted to controlling the volunteers. So that can become a problem as well. And then, as I mentioned before, I need to encourage, support, and replenish the people who are responding. People don't want to walk away from the emergency. They're so committed to it. But as I said before, after a certain time you become not effective. So we need to make sure we can sustain the operation. People need to take rest, they need to eat, and we need to have the rotation of key personnel. So those are the things that I am concerned about based on past practice and past history as you read through what's on that chart as well, which is a little more formal.
all right, Tom?
I've got several responsibilities during emergency, one of which is to assist the units in acquiring the materials that they need to get, so that I would likely work with legal. For example, you could say, you can imagine a situation where the university has something we need, working with legal in a quick way to figure out how to get that equipment and procure it for staff use is a major role. obviously being persnickety and tracking the costs that we incur. And we have the assessing group who does property appraisals available to Derek as he needs to call upon them to assess damage. Those things are important in a significant event. IT is available to, they need to keep our systems up and running. They need to keep our applications that we use operational, and then they can also advise on how the technology that we have can be applied to a situation, whether it's technology, for example, parks may have that could be used someplace else. Those are the major things that I would be responsible for.
Greg?
Public services will be responsible for protecting the drinking water. It's important that we have a good, safe drinking water source during the emergency. Also, likewise, making sure the sewage disposal system is working correctly and we're not causing public health issues. Other activities we'd be doing is supporting the crews on the street, the police and fire, with providing any barricades they need, any barriers to help control the situation if it is a localized situation. The other activities we would be doing is providing what immediate resources we have, like dump trucks, generators, backhoes, loaders, to assist in any of the rescue efforts. And ultimately, if we were going into a cleanup situation, those resources would continue. We have a plan where we'd automatically move our crews to 2 12-hour shifts so that we could be supporting 24 hours a day for the long term. And then, of course, I'd have to keep Tom happy by documenting all our expenditures and resources used.
Lisa, I don't know, you want to go over those again real quick?
Just very quickly. So we already discussed some of the PIO responsibilities, which was establishing the JIC. I also immediately would need to be notifying the media agencies about how we will be conducting communications and when, immediately distributing probably a holding statement, and then letting them know exactly where we will be briefing the media and at what time. Usually that would be within 1 to 2 hours of the initial event. The media will come whether we want them to or not, so that is primarily one of the most important reasons for why we need to tell them exactly where we will be briefing them and when, and also throughout the emergency, providing them with the information that they need frequently, so that they are not on the fire chief and police chief's backs. That is my role then, to support the media throughout and provide them the information that they're looking for when it is verified and available. I also would be coordinating media tours of the disaster area when appropriate, and with those personnel that would be conducting the tour, and monitoring all forms of social media and communications for the rumor controls that need to be addressed, and dispelling the inaccurate information that is out there. And finally, providing Tom all the documentation that he needs.
Do you think that's been beat into us? I think we got that part. We get it. I've already touched on mine. I'm going to move on here so we can save some time. Derek?
We basically have 2 primary responsibilities. The first and foremost is damage assessment. We have a trained group of staff, both our building inspectors and our planning group, that can be called in when necessary to move into an area, large or small, to do damage assessment. And that assessment is done in a very specific manner that's dictated by FEMA and others, and within a time frame that's required by FEMA. I think it's 48 hours. We have to Is that right, Rick?
72.
72. We're
Again,
shooting
that's
for
tied to
48,
your
yeah.
dollars, by the way.
And to say FEMA is perstickety, which seems to be the word of the day, would be an understatement. But we have to bring in teams and have enough people available to go into an area, assess the damage, and then coordinate with the assessor's office on what that cost or potential assessed value of that damage is, and enter it in the system to make sure all of our eligible private and public property damage is recorded in an appropriate manner and available for FEMA. The second part of what we do, at least under community services, is kind of like Craig's group, in a certain extent, Parks and Recreation has a significant amount of facilities and equipment that may be able to be of assistance to a situation, either as a facility, a staging area, a temporary medical facility, even as far as overnight stays for people who may come out of state. And we have to know what facilities are available and in what situations for those events, along with equipment and other things. And we make those available to the logistics group. So that's really our two primary roles in a situation like this.
Great. One point is FEMA, if this is declared a national emergency, will send teams in to help begin to reimburse people for their losses shortly. I mean, as soon as we get them information and those kind of things. So it's important that damage assessment process be started as soon as the area is stable and they can get in there and start feeding that into the system. It's a real important component because it translates over to the citizens and their viability in terms of getting some aid as quickly as possible. So that's a real important component. And fortunately for us, Derek had his people trained. We've got them here. They're in the organization. They're on site, and we can use them as soon as we possibly can, which expedites our customer service to the community. And finally, Chief Baird.
So the police department, we're obviously going to be the first responders for most of the incidents, regardless of what they start out as. So we'll be the ones that are initially assessing the situation to see what's going on with it, what type of additional response is necessary. We will be responsible for security at any of the locations that are either directly associated with the event or any of the places that we need just to support the staff to properly mitigate the situation. We also will be responsible for any of the criminal investigations. Obviously, some disasters are going to, or some events are going to be more law enforcement centric, and others are going to be weather related. However, even the weather related ones, unfortunately, there will be people that will try and take advantage of any type of disaster and as an opportunity to prey on people. So we would be responsible for that as well. And other than that, we're going to be the ones that are primarily going to be pulling in the resources from other law enforcement agencies, depending on where like the situation we're going to talk about today, completely isolated within the city of Ann Arbor. But if this is something that hits the region, and other resources, other police agencies across the region are also equally taxed, we also have the ability to reach our feelers out even farther. And we will maintain a proper list of all of our details.
Okay, do we need 5 minutes? You want to continue on? Okay. All right, now we're going to get into the training exercise. Let me just go ahead and start. Can you all read that real well? What has happened is, and you have a map in your packet, and you can pull it out and take a look at it and follow me. It was in May. We've had some storm activity. We've had, my microphone. We have had reports of bad weather stretching all the way from across the state. We've been monitoring it as it moves this way. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1:15 on a Thursday, we've been notified to activate the emergency sirens. We did so, and shortly after that, we start getting phone calls of damage over on the west side of town. Police have got units heading that way. Now in fire, we're starting to get the same calls. So we're starting to send our resources that way. All right? So this is at about 13:25, by the way, is 1:25 in the afternoon. I'm sorry, we're geared to that military stuff. I should have fixed that. So we're in the afternoon. We're about 1:25. I'm sorry, these are military times, but I'll make sure to bring them back around for you, okay? All right? So now we get the first officer on the scene. They're at a school. They're reporting there's extensive damage right now. at least to the structures. We don't know about injuries at this point in time. What we know is we've got a serious incident. We're getting more and more reports coming in right now. All right? We're estimating there may be 30 blocks involved in this. And what you see is things strewn all over the place. We get hold of the city administrator, he immediately ramps up the EOC, gets the command staff and key personnel, and he tells us to get there now. Actually, he really doesn't have to tell us, we kind of know. When something like that's going down, we go to the EOC, and we know who those key people are. Myself and Jim will be on the scene almost immediately. The rest of that staff and the manager, the emergency management director, will head immediately to the EOC. This isn't go to the war room. This is the real deal. And that's what's happening right now. They're headed that direction. You have a picture in your mind of what's been hit? There's what you got. That's what the first crews are seeing on the scene. Pretty extensive. That's the school. There's some of the neighborhood. So we've had a significant event. That's where we're at. In the back of your mind, we'll go back. Let me talk for a minute about the EOC. Again, we told you that that's our operating environment there. This is kind of what it looks like. Everything's set up. You'll see that the city, and you have this map. You can't see it real well right now, but we're set up in teams so that we support each other. You'll see the city administrator there. He's got his command staff right there with him. You'll see the operations folks over here, Jim and myself. You'll see planning up in here, all supporting some of these ancillary agencies down here that we know we're going to need. We'll get there. We'll get it ramped up. Now, this is the room. Off of the room, there are conference areas and offices and those kind of things that will be necessary. And then the EOC. All right? We have one in the city we'll talk about later, but there's some areas there, office space. In the ideal EOC, you have the room, and you have conference areas, and you have sleeping quarters, and you have dining stuff. People stay there. You take rotations through there. We're not quite to that point yet here in Ann Arbor. As we look at new fire stations, we're looking at some options. A fire station is a great place for that because we're there 24/7 anyway. So you can utilize some of those existing facilities. But it will, you know, and there would be areas for you folks over in the other area if need be, where you can be close, understand what's going on, get plugged in. All right? So we put that in there just so in your mind you have some sense of what that's like. Be a room like this laid out just right. You'll have phone lines dropping from there, computer connections coming out of the ceiling. They're already there. We just plug this stuff in and go to work. We've got big screen TVs in there because you got to know what's going on in the media. It is really a command center. All right? So that's the room that we'll be working in right there when we talk about the EOC. All right. It's about 13:45. I'm sorry. It is 1:45 in the afternoon. We've been into this thing now for about 20 minutes. We're arriving at the EOC. The thing is set up. We're starting to get reports in. What we're going to do is go through here, and I'm going to turn to the incident commander and ask him who he's going to give this to, how he's going to deal with it, and those kind of things. And the idea here for you is to get an understanding of how this flows in, how it goes to the right location, who deals with it. That structure that we just had up there, that's what you're going to see him operate in here in a minute. You'll start to see it get fleshed out, that skeleton get fleshed out as we go through this. And that's for you to understand how it all plugs together. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So you see that we're on the scene there. We got considerable damage. Critical structures impacted by that include an elementary school, 2 shopping centers, several businesses on West Stadium. Also, many residential structures appear to have been extensively damaged. Is there anything in there, Mr. Manager, that you want to act on? Or?
So as I said before, one of the hardest things to do is recognize when the emergency starts and when to start the process. We've gotten some warning, and due to the nature of this being a tornado, it's a safe assumption that people have all been protective shelter. So what we're going to deal with as the tornado is left here is really the recovery. Police and fire are out there. They've secured the scene. They have representatives. We've activated the EOC, and people are coming in and getting set up. It's very important to get an early situation report to understand where we are and to communicate with all of you so you know what the situation is. We're going to make a decision early as to whether we dismiss the rest of the staff once the imminent hazard is gone, and who the key people are, so we start to set up that 24/7 staffing. We get ourselves ready to conduct the emergency response action, and we wait for additional input from the on-scene commanders.
That's an excellent point that the administrator makes. This is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Folks are in their offices. This is going on. And we've certainly sent them to shelters. Now that this has happened, what do you do with the workforce? How do you, you've got mission critical folks you're certainly going to have to bring in. But what do you do with everybody else? So that's an issue that has to be dealt with. He can't just forget about that. He's got to have something in mind to say, okay, HR, go take care of this, safety, you make sure those people get out of there. Tell them we'll notify them about coming back or whatever. See, that'll slip your mind. You'll get so wrapped up in that you'll forget about the people that are already there that you still got to take care of. That was a good catch.
It's also important to note that we don't have routine communications with television news outlets and the major media, so that we'll need to have a communications plan so they know where to go when they're not underfoot with the police and fire who are on scene. As we prepare, Mr. Yupi will start getting his resources together from a recovery standpoint. Tom will have us all briefed and ready to go. Derek will start getting ready to do assessment of the buildings to make sure what's safe to occupy and what's not. And he'll also at that time have some temporary sheltering that he has to do. Lisa's job is very tough because she has to get the information, determine what is in fact true and factual versus what's rumor, and then also start to establish those relationships with outside media that we normally don't have.
I'm not going to ask you on this, but essentially what you're going to see here, we're starting to get information in, and the point is we've got to collect that information. It's got to go to Lisa. She's got to start bringing these facts together, putting them in some coherent package so that we can share them with you and the public. And this really doesn't require a lot of action other than somebody's got to know what it is, because on-scene crews have already got it taken care of. Now this one might be a little bit different. We got a forward command. We took the fire station over there. Jim and I are both there right now trying to get our crews under a unified strategy moving forward, scene, perimeter and stuff. But there's something that he probably wants us to do at this point in time. Mr. Manager?
I'm sorry.
When we're here and we've got that set up, do you want us there or do you want us back with you?
Well, I think once you do the initial response, I want you to have a delegated on-scene commander and have you come back to the EOC to manage and to receive information and direct resources.
And to support you, for sure. That's part of that whole issue, so that you can make, informed decisions. Because we will be in direct direct communications with our forward forces on the scene.
Right.
We'll have that communication line. So it will be tough for us to pull away, but our seconds in command will take that over at some point, and we'll get back to the EOC. I'm not going to say that it'll be within the first 15 or 20 minutes. It may take us an hour and 15 minutes where we're just talking to the EOC by radio until we can get back there and get settled. Because we've got to get our assets in place and get them headed in a direction too. And the truth is, we'd like to stay there if we could, but that isn't going to happen. We know better. So, Jim, do you have anything to say on that?
Just from a law enforcement perspective, the initial incident's going to be very labor intensive. It's going to take us a while to actually set up that perimeter. We're going to be in a position probably where we're getting multiple 911 calls about people that need some immediate assistance. At that time of day, we're going to start calling in people early for the next couple of shifts. We'll get immediate resource help from other Washtenaw County law enforcement agencies as well. We will, as we go forward, we'll get to the position where we can kind of set up a harder perimeter, but in the initial hour or two, that's going to be really tricky to do. We have a system in place through the Code Red system, assuming that it is an isolated event, such as the one that we have here. We have the ability to call in all of our staff at once, or we also have them broken down by a third, so that we can bring in 1/3 at a time.
It's also important during this time that, Mayor, we come back to you and you, as necessary, get the council to convene. There may be some emergency contracts that we need. There may be some additional funding that needs to be put in place as well. So as part of the planning section, we're going to forecast what it is that we could potentially need, so we're not hamstrung later in the event that we need to get resources on site.
You see this down here? Now, the reason we put this in here, you see, they're asking for this technical rescue team. What they're gonna start doing is digging. Now, when we get that information in the command center, the first thing you're thinking of is they're gonna need more than that. They're gonna be asking for state assets and federal assets probably, given the large part of that. So when that gets to the EOC, and it gets to the boss there, he's gonna tell the planning people, he's gonna tell the logistics people, and particularly this individual, start thinking, because you may end up having to ask for those specialized teams. We can call for this on the radio and get it, and we can call for a state team. But what'll have to happen is it'll have to go back to the EOC and go through those channels to get those right away. Like we sent folks to Florida, that is an EMAC request, and that has to go through those chains to do that. And so while that hasn't been done yet, you can pretty much bet if they're starting to make those kind of requests, you're gonna start to plan for them and forecast them. That's where the planning function and logistics all come into play, and then his pipeline right online with that secure thing, being able to get those resources that we talked about. Okay, there's what you just saw. All right, now we're at about an hour at this point in time, and things are starting to pick up a little bit. First thing is, of course, several national news agencies are calling for updated information.
So we're going to receive the request, and our PIO is tasked to handle it.
So one of the things that will be challenging in the first few hours of the incident is the media, especially the TV media, wants the backdrop of the disaster, and they want to be close to the disaster for photos and video, but we want them far enough away from the disaster, Jim's smiling, so that they're not impeding our emergency responders' work that they're doing. So I would be immediately tasked with figuring out where that JIC is going to be located, informing the media, but also part of that I would be scrambling to do is working with our partners that we haven't mentioned yet. Parents will want to be descending on that school. It's been hit. Your immediate reaction as a parent is, where is my student? I will go get them myself. And so we also would need to be working with the schools, because they immediately would be setting up, as part of their EOC process, a point for where parents should be coming to get students in working with the police, so that they're not also impeding those rescue efforts. I also would need to immediately be contacting the hospitals, because those who are hurt would be getting sent to hospitals. Those who are looking for a loved one want to know, who do I contact to check if I have a child or a loved one at a hospital. So the media, it would be my job to connect the media with getting that information out to those people seeking it. So working with those partners and ensuring that we are just helping to give that information out on their behalf, but not speaking for them, sharing the information for them in those initial hours.
Thanks, Lisa. Oh, of course, the president of U of M is calling, wants to talk to the city administrator. It's up to him whether he's going to take that call.
If it was the president himself, I would most certainly take the call, but if it's his staff, we have a liaison officer whose purpose is to really handle these kind of calls and to be knowledgeable, but also be someone whose position of authority is respected. So both that and any other volunteers that want to show up and start offering help, we need to control them. We need to communicate clearly with them, not to self-deploy that, just to really, for the time being, to stay out of the way, and then when we can best use their resources, to have them come in. And those are things that the liaison in the EOC would be directed to address.
Great. You would think, just on that same point, you would think that a trained professional would know not to self-deploy. So you're looking at the Las Vegas thing the other day, and there's a California fire chief from a large county, assistant chief, gets in his car and just drives there to help. Now, people are coming from everywhere, and we know as professionals, we welcome the help, but we want it organized and in the right fashion, because you can never keep track of people. And it just, and he is one of who knows how many that did that adds extra stress. You appreciate their effort, you appreciate their willingness to want to help. There's a right way to get those resources so that you don't have to manage it. Yes, ma'am.
We have CERT certified, trained volunteers in the community. Is this at the point in time in this scenario where perhaps, and I'm assuming that we're training those folks in these protocols and how to assist us, where they might be called in to assist with volunteer management?
Yeah, there's CERT teams. In fact, we used them at the ball game the other night. We utilize it more than you know. The windstorm, those kind of things, they report to Rick, and he would have those folks back in. I tell you, when we get a lot of wires down and wind and stuff, we like to have them come back, because what happens is they can sit on those wires until DTE gets there, freeing up an emergency crew to take another call. They're a lot of help to us in that regard, and they would certainly be utilized in a situation like this. That's what they're really trained for.
To do this
those
kind of frontline
traffic,
support.
with the all those kind of things. Barriers, they're really good at that. So they would be. Again, you got the stadium emergency management. Says the governor wants to speak to the mayor. So it's up to you whether you'll take that call or not. We'll get a hold of you. And,
I'll do it.
actually, more than likely, they give it to the liaison officer who would run you down and say, this is for you, Mr. Mayor. It's up to you if you want to chat. We got here's a good one. Now this I promise you, this will happen. The churches who are known to be, humanitarian givers, and we need them. Red Cross volunteers, Humane Society, those kind of shelters, they will come knocking at your door, and do not turn them away. I'll tell you, from an emergency standpoint, operations on the fireground, emergency scene, people are so worried about their pets that they will do things that they shouldn't do. What we tell those folks is, give us your name and your number and your contact. There is a place for you, and as soon as we get hold of this thing and understand the scope of the situation and how we can work you in, you'll be a partner of ours. So be patient with us. It's important.
Churches are important for a couple reasons. They are local to where the event occurred. They're great places to talk to people whose homes are affected, who don't know where their families are. They also sometimes have really big parking lots, which are really helpful in terms of controlling people's movement as well. And they do have access to private resources to provide aid and assistance.
Absolutely, yeah. I think I let the, no pun intended, by the way, this is what you're seeing here at this time. During the second briefing, I should have went to this slide to begin with. The on-scene command, they're asking now, they're at that vacated fire station. What they need now is, here you go, they're asking for Michigan Task Force 1, which is the group that went to Florida, plus Ohio's task force. Now what we did, is I set you up for that whole situation right there, because I know what's going to happen, haven't been involved in this. But Mr. Administrator, is there anything you want to add to that I didn't already let the cat out of the bag about?
No, this is something that that Rick would handle, so I would turn that over to him and ask that he, in the planning session, respond and react.
Yeah, these are the kind of radio requests we're going to get. They really are. Here comes one right here. They need heavy equipment, debris removal, all that kind of stuff. That's going to happen pretty early. Some of it will go to school. By the way, what we'll do with that scene is we will do what they call sector it off. We will cut it up into smaller chunks. There may be 6 or 8, depending on the size of this. In each of those areas, we'll have a commander in charge of them. And they will manage the assets there. And they will report to one single commander who will bring that forward and bring it to us, is how it works. Debris and National Guard. They're asking for National Guard. So, which is going to be an issue overnight probably. Plus, you may need the personnel power that they can bring in a situation like this.
So it's something that I would delegate to the logistics officer to address and to handle. Also during this time frame, as it permits, we're going to have situation updates and have the ability to brief each other on information as it comes in. Sure. This is about an hour after the event, and that first hour is critical, so we want to make sure that everyone is as informed as possible.
And Lisa will be the conduit for a lot of that kind of stuff around the tables. Stuff like this is coming in. I'm just going to preempt you here. This is really for information only, but what the manager would do with that, the administrator would do with that, is make sure Lisa has it, because she's trying to prepare a packet for you, a packet. We want accurate information. She would talk with the hospitals, know just what those numbers are, if we were gonna let that information out at a scheduled press briefing. Everything that goes on in there, she's gotta have some sense, her and her staff, of what that information is and what's going forward there. So, okay, anything else? There you go. All right, it is now 5:30 in the afternoon. All right. The city administrator requests that the mayor and council gather in chambers for a special emergency session. He'd like the mayor to declare a local state of emergency. What he's determined is this thing is significant enough that we are gonna need outside resources. You see us starting to call for them now. There's gonna be phenomenal damage here. The sooner that we get that process going, the better, I think is the idea there behind that request. And that goes to the governor. Now, Rick, you and Mary want to talk a little bit about, in your packet, in each of your packets, there is a dummy declaration. You want to pull that out and take a look at it before we go to break here.
We need to discuss that at this point.
Yeah, just go over that real quick if you want to take a look at that. There's certain things that are required during a declaration. The mayor can make that, declaration. We've brought you together in chambers, the administrator has, to make sure everybody's on board and understands that and what's gonna transpire. And also to make sure that everybody's informed. This is a good time to bring everybody up to speed as to where we're at, what we're going, what things look like going forward. So, the other thing is we wanted to share this with you in case it ever happens. That's not the best time to take a look at that. Now's a better time. So I'll turn it over to Rick and Mary here just to talk a little bit about what that form has. And you've only got 2.5 minutes between the two of you, so.
2.5 minutes. You have a format for declaring a local state of emergency, and you have a format for requesting a governor's disaster declaration and state assistance. I have filled in the blanks on these forms as an example of what you may want to put into this document. The local state of emergency, of course, starts some things moving in Chapter 15 of the city code because of that declaration. In terms of information flow from our EOC to the district coordinator for state police and the State Emergency Operations Center is critical. That link between on-scene operations and the incident command system, command staff that we have at the EOC is critical. I need to get as much information as quickly as possible what's going on the scene, because that's the stuff the state needs in order to look at and approve the declaration process. So we have to get as much information up as possible. So you can see the write-up on the local declaration. You can also see the write-up on the request for a governor's emergency or disaster declaration and state assistance. That declaration from the state of Michigan gets us state resources. And as you look in the bottom part here, I'm listing some of the resources that we're requesting. Search and rescue teams, additional law enforcement staff, 24-hour security, traffic barricades, dump trucks, front-end loaders for additional debris management, and forestry crews, engineering services. These are stuff we're requesting immediately from the state for assistance with. This starts the process of going for a presidential declaration. And that's through the state, and they go to FEMA Region 5, and they start the process for the presidential declaration under the Stafford Act.
The local state of emergency under Chapter 15 is the mayor's responsibility. We don't need an emergency session to do that. The city attorney has a to-go bag that has a hard copy of the local state of emergency that can be filled in and signed no matter where we are. The emergency session would still have to comply with Open Meeting Act regulations, so the city attorney would be working with the city administrator and the mayor to make sure the necessary postings and other things were available and to Lisa, as well as posted wherever we were going to be. At the same time we would be dealing with an emergency session, we would probably also be evaluating whether or not a travel ban or a curfew would be appropriate. That might be discussed with council in session. Also, council might be asked to formally pass over authority for certain purchasing or other ordinances at that time, depending on the damage, and that would be a reason for an emergency session. That kind of information would be conveyed to our regional director through Rick, so that he's already been talking to that individual, letting him know where we are. He's been updating him. They've had a discussion about the potential for a local state of emergency already before council or the mayor is acting. And so all of the information from the emergency session will be forwarded up. I think I stayed in line.
We now come to, it's 8:45, we now come to public comment. Public comment is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers will have 3 minutes in which to speak, timed by our indomitable clerk behind. So please pay close attention to your internal 3-minute clock, as you have no clock in front of you. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speak at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who'd like to speak today at public comment?
Good evening. I actually remember the tornado that went down Stadium back in 1980 and did significant damage. That's how old I am. Anyway, what I want to talk about is the crosswalk ordinance and the problems that we're having. And first, I'd just like to share something that came in the New York Times today. Nobel in Economics is awarded to Richard Thaler. I don't know if anyone has heard of him before, but it states that he is a pioneer in applying psychology to economic behavior and in shedding light on how people make economic decisions, sometimes rejecting reality. And of course, that reminded me of our crosswalks, because everything reminds me of our crosswalks, it seems. But people ask me, Kathy, why do we have our crosswalk ordinance, and what's like behind it? And I just don't understand it. And a community leader approached me tonight and said, Kathy, can we just sit down and have coffee, because I'm hearing what you're saying, but I just want to understand it better. And I've been struggling with this, and I think what it really is about economics. It's not about pedestrian safety. It's not about pedestrian access. And you have to remember that we had a moratorium on streetlights for over 10 years. And in the middle of that moratorium, we adopted a crosswalk ordinance, first with the approaching language and later with the language we have now. And at that same time, we were trying to take as much transportation funding as we could and direct it towards development in the name of a train station consultants, train station planning. So it was really about economics and about diverting funds. So now we have a crosswalk ordinance that doesn't require any intent whatsoever, which is unlike every law in every country in Europe and best practice. Anyway, I don't want to go on and name all of them. But now we don't have to have any intent. We don't have to know what anyone's thinking. We simply stop for every pedestrian who's standing near a crosswalk. The unintended consequence is that we're going to be arresting teenagers for trespassing because they're standing on the side of the road. This is sad. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed.
I guess they have to have it for the television. I'm sorry. I keep forgetting about that. Do something a little bit different now. It's 5:30. We've already had the council session. Some other things are starting to roll in. Now, I'm not going to ask the city administrator here a couple times. I'm going to ask you where you think these ought to go in that organizational chart that we put together. Give it your best shot so that you're engaged a little bit and have to think about how that thing works, okay? So now what we're getting is these folks are arriving in town. You know, we called for all those mutual aid companies from across the state, all that support. Where do you think that the administrator would give that to? Who do you think he would give that to of those 4 major elements down at the bottom of that chart to handle? Somebody's got to put them up. Go ahead.
So I think for their employment in the scene, I think that's gonna go into operations for the things like we've got to house them, feed them.
Right.
Logistics.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, it's a little more settled than that, because when logistics gets ready to do it, they gotta go to Tom. No, seriously, because we gotta keep track of this stuff. So it really is a partnership there. Tom, where we're gonna put these people, we got money for this, you got a PO someplace, those are the kind of things that are going on behind the scene in that room to take care of that. But it will be logistics responsibility to get them fed and sheltered and those kind of things. It can be in a gym, it can be wherever, but we've got to take care of that. That's our responsibility. There'll be costs involved, and somebody's got to manage it. Logistics and that staff will handle that. Mr. Administrator, anything you want to add to that?
Well, before that point, there's a planning function. We know that's coming, so you have a planning section that's making sure that we know who the outside sources and vendors are that we can go to.
Correct.
And then when you get to the next bullet behind that, there's a requirement to feed people on site as well. So that becomes a logistical issue to get the food out to where the first responders are stationed.
Little things like that we take for granted in a campaign, and this is more like a campaign, you got to do for those. How about porta-johns? You've got to have those at those work sites. I mean, there's some issues in safety in my ocean and stuff, even in emergency scenes. We got to think about those things. We take them for granted, but you really do. Somebody's got to manage that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all part of this whole system here. Okay. Any idea where that might go? It's the one about the sectors with search and rescue operations continue within the various sectors. Really, that's information only. If anything, it'd go to Lisa, right? So she continues to update her database of information. All right, we got 80 persons to area emergency rooms. They've treated 120 at the field level triage. That's what will happen. They will treat some people right on scene, get their names and stuff and release them because they'll be minor. But that information is important, is it not? Where do we want to send it? Go ahead. You're on. You got it.
Oh, where do we send it? We send it to Lisa.
Yeah, okay. That's pretty simple. You can do this. Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
Within the command center itself, I see emergency medicine. Who does HVA fall under amongst?
Actually, operationally, it'll be under fire.
Got it.
Okay, for the most part, because we coordinate, and our folks will be involved with them. They have their own systems and emergency plans with the hospitals and stuff. But on scene in the emergency operations center, fire, EMS, rescue would come under my departments to be able to manage that, know what's going on, who's going where, and that kind of stuff. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. They do. They have their own. I mean, they have their own disaster plans that work out with that work with the hospitals. They have a system to where they mitigate the number that goes to each area, so that they don't overload them. They've got a very elaborate system that they'll throw down and in place. They'll have those field operations out there, those triage points and things. Yes.
Let's say, so this is a pretty localized disaster, but there was also, it sounded like a tornado in Chelsea, or at least some touchdown there. And let's say HVA is servicing other communities as well. Their resources are limited, but also the sheriff may have their own emergency center established. Who does HVA then? Who's the highest point of contact, and who?
It depends.
Ultimately?
They have a system internally.
Got it.
What I'll do is ask for my resources. They'll give me my resources. They're very deep. They have mutual aid packs with other EMS providers across the state, very much like we do. So the system is redundant. And actually, what you really don't want to do, having worked in a large system like that, is if I tapped everything that's here, I don't want the stuff right next door. I want to bring stuff that's, maybe a step away, so that you don't strip that area. There's a way that you go in. In fact, good CAD systems already program that and make sure no particular area gets, depleted of resources. So they have a system that helps balance that and gets that resource to you. Yeah, Jim?
We're very fortunate with HVA. The HVA footprint is huge.
It is.
They have
It's
a
very
lot
good.
they have a lot of medics all across this region. So we're pretty fortunate in that area. It would probably be a pretty significant event if they even had to go outside of their own shop to provide those resources.
Yeah, I don't know how many counties, 4 or 5 counties, they just picked up another county they provide service for. They are very deep. They are very deep. Doesn't mean they wouldn't be tapped, because they still, like you say, they've got to provide it to the other areas as well. But they have a system that kind of skips or jumps or whatever, so they balance that out.
One of the challenging parts about this is that in an event like this, depending on the size, but the rest of the city is still business as usual. So there's still going to be other calls for service for the police, for the fire agencies, or other medical runs that HVA is going to run on. So it's balancing the event, but also our normal workload as well.
If we exceeded our capabilities, Council has approved the Michigan Emergency Management Act participation. So there's a framework for us to call for assistance beyond the normal mutual aid agreements that we usually operate under, too.
And that's really what the state's about. We can tap those, they've got that network that we can tap and bring in as we need to. Next, somebody want to take a shot at this? They report that they, one of the sectors has a Quick Mart store that's got a fire raging. They're seeing a lot of blue flames. They suspect that natural gas is involved. If they made a request, the command center, any thoughts who that would go to? Go ahead. Zach?
Probably should be verified, but yeah, I'm assuming that would be fire as well as public service.
Yeah, probably what's going to happen is it's going to go to public service, and what we're going to want him to do is to shake the tree for us, because he has relationships with them, saying, we're not messing around here, get some of your crews or move some on-scene crews over there to support that operation.
Do you also want more information coming back about potential other gas leaks? Is that
Oh
something
yeah, they'll be out, Hazmat will be out monitoring that entire area is what they'll be doing. Hazmat will be there, yeah.
Do you want residents calling in if they suspect there are gas leaks?
They're going to anyway.
Fair
They're
enough.
going to anyway, there's no doubt about it, yeah. And we're gonna try to get ahead of them as much as possible to figure out where the actual leaks are and stuff. Get crews out with monitors to do that. The problem we have, obviously, is if we don't secure those, it's real easy to get an ignition source, and we're gonna have a mess on our hands.
Larry?
Yes.
That's actually a good point that he brings up, though, is the fact that another piece of my role, though, is educating residents about what they have to be doing, what they should be doing, and what they could be doing. So there's multiple pieces to that, such as the down power lines that we're going to have, and telling people not to touch a power line, not to go near a power line, that CERT is monitoring the power lines. And then, like you brought up, if we have issues of natural gas, then informing residents about what they should be doing if this happens. We'd have to be informing them if they are supposed to be sheltering in place. If there's any curfews, there's a little gnat that all of us have been trying to get, if they should be evacuating and where to evacuate to. So depending on the disaster, not everyone knows what they should be doing readily. And that's part of our role then, is telling them what the emergency is and informing
What's really
them.
important to add on to what she's saying is we talked about before, they may not have radios and television. We are gonna be getting them out of there. We're gonna take them to some centralized place, and that's where we can start getting that information to them. We really want as many people as possible out of the hazard zone until we clear that thing. And that's a great opportunity then for Lisa to bring that information and give it to them. And if they got a radio or whatever that they can, text, social media, that's great too. But that's always a challenge with these things, and that we lose power and communications. So a lot of times, we're gonna have to find out from you folks in the command center, the forward folks, as to where those evacuation points are, so we can tell them personally, look, you gotta get your folks, you gotta get your animals, you gotta go here. There's a ride up here, a bus, you go get on that bus and it'll take you someplace safe. And it's tough to get people to leave a lot of times. It really is. It's a challenge. It's a real challenge. Thanks, Lisa. They need portable lights and generators overnight so they can keep digging. Where would we send that? Where? Yeah, great, okay. With that, our relief is coming in. It's 2,300 hours. We have secured this for the evening. And so I just want to say, any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Just in this day and age, when people have their own drones, do we employ other emergency rules where we then have, I don't know, regulations on things like that to also control, the airwaves, the, I don't know, privacy
make requests to
intrusions,
the FAA and those kind
the
of
dissemination of
things.
information that is not helpful, do we?
I
The
don't know about
media
the-
is
yeah.
going to typically descend whether we want to or not, and I know that happened in Dexter for 48 hours. Helicopters were over my neighborhood. So to your point, it's a privacy that I think you're raising. But unfortunately, I think that would be an expected outcome.
I can see how this would be hard to, control.
For lack of them having valid information to share, in the meantime, they're going to be showing. And that's just what they do. So that would have to be something we would just simply expect.
Mr. Weberhowski?
So this isn't city operations, but you were talking earlier about not wanting people to self-deploy. What's the line between that? In this scenario, it's my neighborhood that got hit. So my plan would be after I know that my family's safe, checking on neighbors. So what's the line between checking on neighbors? I've got a neighbor with MS who's homebound versus not self-deploying. Where do you see?
Listen,
Yeah.
people are gonna do that naturally. You're gonna check on the people. You're elderly, you're gonna make us aware where they're at. You're absolutely gonna do that. There's no way we'll ever stop that. Key for us is figuring out where they're at. You tell us, we'll do what we have to do to get them out of there. One of the things that you can do as a leader in the community is rally people to get out of the area, go to the right shelters, those kind of things, and help us clear that area. But people are naturally, if they're elderly, I'm gonna go check on them. That's all there is to it. That's not self-deploying, that's just being a good neighbor, and letting us know if there is a problem there. But trying to clear the whole block yourself wouldn't work, just let us know. We will be in that area, no doubt.
The bigger concern with the self-deployment is from the other emergency services. So that's one of the things that we consistently see is that we end up dedicating more resources to the resources than we can really put them to good work. So that's more of the concern. We know people are going to try and help out, and they should, and we would never expect them to do otherwise. But it's more along the lines of, I'll give you an example. When in the late '80s, when the flight crashed out at Metro Airport, and our police sent staff to that. Now, I don't know whether they asked for the help, just mutual aid requests, or whether we just had people that heard it and went. There's certain things that are gonna get a pretty immediate response, but then it's post that really acute time of the crisis where we really want to try and manage that a little bit better.
The HVA plays a role that I haven't really heard quite enough about. Obviously, they're going to provide EMS services and transport where it's needed, but also as running dispatch, or as part of dispatch, in county's service and dispatch, and that's public facing and information distribution, I assume, and triage. How do we coordinate with dispatch, broadly speaking?
Standard. We will be able to talk to them directly because of our radios, and they will allocate a lot of those resources. A lot of the basic mutual aid will not come through the command center. It will come through existing mutual aid agreements where we call them and bring them to a staging area. And they will monitor that, and they will tell us what resources are in staging, and when we pull them down, there are just certain areas. When we start asking for things like USAR teams and that kind of stuff, that's where it'll come back. They'll let us know. We'll have the radios. We'll hear that stuff in the command center, in the EOC. And we would let them know, EOC to Central, be advised, we'll take that here, notify the state.
So a lot of the resident-facing services will come through dispatch,
Yeah, I think
practically in the
I
ordinary.
know what you're asking. So if somebody calls 911,
That makes one of us. Yeah.
How do they how do we get them to the right place?
Yeah.
So if somebody calls 911, it all goes to our central dispatch. However, if it is something that's going to be kicked to the fire department or to HVA, it's not just there's no severing of that connection. So our dispatcher at Central will actually stay on the line. So if there is some type of coordination that's needed, we would still be in a position to do that.
And they'll notify the command, hey, we got so-and-so on the line. They're saying there's a collapse at 123 North Main Street. Are you aware of that? And we would say, for example, the forward commander or whatever would say, that's Sector A. Sector A, you take your crews and check that area. And that'll still happen, just like it does every day. Just like it does every day for those kind of things. And what they would do for us will give us 20 more ambulances or something. That's where they'll come to the EOC, or we'll monitor that and say, hey, we're going to bring you forward these resources. You can expect them to come from here. We will have radios there. We will know exactly what's going on the scene and who's doing what, and really understand ourselves where we need to intervene and turn to the group there and say, get me 5 bulldozers. Get me, those kind of things, if you would.
I assume that that there'll be a higher volume of calls, and that part of the preparation for the event includes increasing capacity.
Yes.
Yep. I would just say thank you for your time this evening. I hope that the 3 things that we talked about were accomplished. I hope you have a better appreciation and understanding of how the structure works, where you fit in, what everybody's roles are, how this thing builds or contracts as necessary, what the legal requirements are, so that if and when something does happen, and we hope it never does, that we've at least come together, talked about it, understand the roles, how we'll interact. You don't want that to be the first time that you have to come across some of this. So we're here for additional questions. If not, I'm going to turn it back to the city administrator to wrap this thing up. If nobody else has any comments, we'll call it an evening.
I appreciate the support and participation of council. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are going to be some additional exercises that are facilitated by outside agencies where your participation will be appreciated and required, particularly when we get the folks from the National Emergency Management Institute come up. They will do things like mock press conferences and really run us through an exercise. It was important to frame some of the things that you'll see coming to you in the next few meetings. Not only the change in the city ordinance, but changes in some of our facilities. Rick mentioned briefly that we're going to put some additional capability into the 3rd floor conference room. That way, when we have minor emergencies, we can evaluate whether we need to activate fully or we can handle them from there, particularly as some of those things relate to minor civil disturbances that might occur. One person who didn't get to speak very much this evening was Steve Shantz, who's been invaluable in helping us fix some of the problems that we've had with some of our backup systems and making sure that we can evacuate our buildings properly and can do those things safely, and helping us with our facilitate training. So even though he didn't have a speaking part per se, it doesn't mean he's not equally important. So I want to call him out as well. This is going to be a team effort when things happen. I'm very comfortable and excited about the abilities of the staff that's in place, and appreciate again that council is willing to take the time to help us be prepared and participate in these exercises.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much. We are adjourned.